Grumman S2 Tracker, the latest in naval aviation anti-submarine warfare. The Tracker has at its disposal varied electronic equipment to hunt enemy submarines and destroy them with either rockets or homing torpedoes. Yes, the Tracker earns its place as the next generation of submarine hunter-killer.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I hope you liked that little intro. My name is Jerry, and this is my tutorial for the Grumman S2 Tracker. I'm releasing it in 4 versions. This one behind me is the U.S. Navy post-nomenclature change S-2A. There's also a U.S. Navy pre-nomenclature change, that's an S2F-1, a Dutch S2F-1, and then a de Havilland Canada-built CS2F-1 in Royal Canadian Navy paint. All 4 versions are operationally the same. However, in the de Havilland Canada version, some of the switches are moved around, but they still work the same. So keep that in mind. This tutorial encompasses all 4 of those variants. So let's hop aboard and get going. Alright, so we're here in the cockpit, and one thing I'd like to mention before we move forward is that I did use the NavAir manuals for this real aircraft when designing this one. So a lot of the quirks and idiosyncrasies that are in the real airplane were designed into this one. With that said, it was designed purposefully as an anti-submarine platform. So to keep things simple and make it a little more enjoyable for everyone, I did simplify some things or leave out certain systems that were maybe not necessary to the simulation of the aircraft. So with that said, well, we get the engines fired up. So first thing I'm going to do is turn on the battery. I'll move over here to our light panel. I'm going to turn on our wing position or navigation lights, our beacon lights, and I'm going to crack the throttle a little bit. Anything over 0.05 will introduce quite a bit of fuel into the carburetor unnecessarily. So when you go to actually start the engines, you'll get a backfire. Now in the real aircraft this would be extremely detrimental to the operation of the engine. However, in game all you're going to get is a loud bang and a flash, and you can continue on. It's just there to kind of wake you up a little bit. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to open our cowl flaps. When I open those, you're going to see little louvers begin to open on the outside of the engine cowling. These allow greater engine or airflow through the engine to keep the engines cool. During takeoff and landings, it's pretty much necessary to have them open. However, during flight, they do create quite a bit of drag. You'll lose about 3 to 4 knots indicated airspeed by having them open. And once the aircraft's in the air, you really don't need to have them open, so you can go ahead and close them. We're going to move over to the co-pilot seat, and over here, over his head, he's got the auxiliary fuel pumps for both engines. We'll turn both of those on. These, of course, prime the fuel lines from the tank to the engines and keep them primed. I would recommend having them on during takeoffs, landings, combat, and aerobatics if you dare try it. While taxiing on the ground, they do draw quite a bit of electricity having them on, and the engines at a low RPM do not generate enough electricity to maintain the draw that comes off of these 2 pumps, so you might want to have them off when on the ground. They do, however, offer a little bit of cooling. Having them on, forcing cold fuel into the engines does cool the engines slightly, albeit not much. But if you're running the engines pretty hot, having them on will keep the engines cooler for a little bit longer. To verify that we do have pressure in our fuel lines, if you look down here at these 2 gauges, they're showing 5 psi, which is fine. Well, back to the pilot seat, and again back over his head there's an engine start selector. This selects either the left or right engine respectively, switches to the right engine, left engine. So right now it's on the right. We have our starter button and our primer button, and then our 2 magnetos down here. These engines are radial engines. One of the downsides of radial engines, of course, is that when they sit for a long period of time, all the oil that was in the upper cylinders will drain to the lower ones. When you go to start the engine, the piston will push against all that oil in the cylinder and create something called hydraulic lock, which will destroy the engine. To avoid that, what we need to do is get all that oil moving around the cylinders first by spinning the engine dry. So we're going to come in here with the right engine selected. I'm going to press and hold the starter button, and I'm going to count 10 cylinders past the spinner. So we'll count that first one. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So all 9 of our cylinders have now been through a compression cycle, which means the oil is now circulated. We'll turn on the right magneto and then press the starter and the primer to introduce a good blast of fuel into the carburetor, and that'll start our engine up, hopefully. We'll look down here at the tachometer, note our RPM. Once you see about 150 RPM, the engine's safely running and you can release the starter and the primer. There we go, we're past 150. I'm going to release the starter and primer. Tachometer RPM still climbing. Our right engine cylinder head temperature is rising. And I'm going to turn on our right engine generator. Look down here at our DC generator voltmeter, and our DC volts are increasing, so that's good. That engine's running fine. We're now going to do the same for the left. I'm going to do it a little quicker. Press the starter, count 10 blades. I'm not going to count that first one. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Left magneto on, primer, and I'm going to watch our tachometer here. The tachometer and the manifold pressure divide inputs from either engine. As you notice, it just dropped a little bit there. That's because now it is dividing both engines against each other. Once you see about 300 RPM, both engines are running nominally, and you can release the starter and the primer. There you go. I'm going to release the starter and primer. Note our cylinder head pressure for the left engine. That's also rising. And I'm going to turn on our left engine generator. Should see an increase in our DC volts. We do. Now, one of the interesting things is about this aircraft, is that only the left engine had an AC generator. The right engine does not. So if you don't have the left engine running, you won't have AC voltage. If you don't have AC voltage, the radar, the MAD detector, the sonar, radios, and our direction indicator compass and our artificial horizons will not function. So we need to have that on once the left engine is running. We'll turn that on. You'll see the light over here for the flight instruments. AC power has extinguished. That means we do have AC power. Our direction our direction indicator compasses are moving to 90 degrees, which is more accurate. We can then uncage our artificial horizons. The flags will go away. We'll do that for the co-pilot as well. And next thing we need to do is turn on our G limiter. The G limiter limits the travel of our elevators. If you have that off, the elevators have a full range of movement from your inputs from the stick. So we want to leave that on throughout the duration of the flight, as it prevents any undue stress to the airframe and keeps people from getting sick in the back. So we're going to leave the G limiter on. We're going to move down here to the rudder assist. What this does is it actually increases the travel of our rudder through providing hydraulic assistance. This was originally for if you were operating on only one engine, which is unfortunately not simulated in this aircraft, at least currently. So we want to have that on for takeoff and landings. We're going to move over to the co-pilot again, and as a note about hydraulics, when both engines are running, you should note about 100 or 1,500 pounds of hydraulic pressure in each engine. If you don't have hydraulic pressure, you can't raise or lower the landing gear, you can't fold the wings, you can't use the flaps, and you definitely can't use the rudder assist. So you need to have 1,500 pounds of pressure in the engines in order to operate those systems. Folding the wings actually requires 3,000 pounds of pressure, and I can demonstrate that for you now. To fold the wings, all we need to do is press that switch. You're going to see the pressure in both engine hydraulic systems begin to charge up to 3,000 or thereabouts psi. Once we get close to 3,000 psi, that light is going to start blinking, indicating that the wings are folding, and indeed they are. If you only have one engine on, this system will still operate. However, the wing folding mechanism will take twice as long And this is just because one engine has to work twice as hard now to lift these heavy wings up and over the fuselage. So doing it with both engines on is preferable. Once the wings are folded, that light will remain on. If you were on a carrier, now we'll move back to the pilot seat. If we're on a carrier, it's now safe to taxi. We can remove the parking brake and begin moving off. A note on taxiing: the front nose wheel does steer. On the real aircraft, it was a dolly. It was free spinning. On this one, it does actually turn, and it will lock itself straight at 50 knots. So if you're traveling over 50 knots, which I don't recommend while you're taxiing, the nose wheel will lock forward and you will be unable to use it for steering. By holding the left or right arrows down is how you taxi, and it also applies a little bit of differential braking to the left or right wheel respectively to increase your turn rate if you hold the arrow down for a length of time. If you hold it down for a really long time, it'll actually feather the left or right propeller, and you can actually do a 180 turn spinning on the one wheel that you're turning into. So a pretty handy system. Just keep that in mind when you are taxiing, that system is always active when you have the landing gear down. Alright, so we're here on the runway, and I'm going to begin unfolding the wings here and getting ourselves ready for takeoff. The next thing while we're waiting for those wings to unfold is we're going to unlock our gust lock. What this does is it neutrally locks all our control surfaces in the neutral position. With that on, you won't have any control of your flight controls. And also the throttle will be limited to 0.20. In fact, what the throttle will try and do is kick itself back to 0.15. It's handy for taxiing or if you're parking the aircraft, but you want to have that definitely off before takeoff. Still waiting on those wings to unfold. So while we're waiting, we're going to make sure our G limiter is on. I put the parking brake on earlier when I stopped here. Take that off. Make sure the rudder assist is on. I'm going to test our fire detection system. Make sure we hear the alarm and both lights come on. We're going to test our fuel quantity gauge. It should show full and then move to empty. Low fuel warning light comes on. We'll check the stall warning. This is to simulate a stick shaker. This aircraft in real life had yokes, not sticks. We want to make sure that's working. At 110 knots, this aircraft, the stall warning will come on. At about 108 knots, you'll stall. So keep that in mind when you are making low passes or coming into land. Anyway, so the wings fold light is extinguished, which means now we can extend our flaps. The flaps have three positions: 15 degrees, 30 degrees, and 45 degrees. At 45 degrees, you will get the slats to come out. There you go. But we only need 15 degrees of flaps for takeoff, which you can adjust using the 5 or 6 keys on the hotkeys there. Alright, so we've got our brakes off, G limiter on, rudder assist is on, it's 15 degrees of flaps, gust lock is off. I'm now going to advance the throttle full forward. When I do that, it's going to get a burst of fuel into the carburetors, which we will hear a little bit of backfire. Don't worry about it, it's fine. Once we're airborne at 110 knots, I'll retract the landing gear and flaps and close the cowl flaps. All of this will happen in pretty close succession. So here we go. Advancing the throttle full forward. There's that backfire I told you about. We're going to hold the center line here. Best we can. 110 knots, I'm going to pull back on the stick. Positive rate of climb. I'm going to press 4, get that landing gear up. There they go. And I'm going to retract the flaps. And close our cowl flaps. And we are now airborne. The aircraft is cleaned up. Next thing I need to do, we don't need takeoff power anymore, so I'm going to back off to about 0.88. This is I find a pretty economical position for the throttle. You can maintain about 140 knots and has a range of just about 100 kilometers. You can make it to the Arctic like this. However, you will be running on fumes by the time you get there. You can back the throttle off to 77 or thereabouts. This is about its most economical setting, where the speed will drop to in the 120s, and our RPMs will drop off quite a bit, and you'll be much more economic with your fuel. However, your speed will, of course, be pretty low. This is good for loitering over a search area while you're hunting submarines, but not so great if you're trying to get somewhere. So I'm going to move it back up to 0.8 here. All right. So next thing I need to indicate or show you how to use is the autopilot. It's a very rudimentary 1950s autopilot. Turning that switch on, what the autopilot will do is it'll attempt to level the aircraft, level the wings, and it'll also hold your last pitch entry that you made with your WS keys. So if I pitch the aircraft up, like I'm doing right now, it will attempt to hold that pitch. That's all it does. It doesn't hold altitude, doesn't hold a level altitude, it just holds, or a level flight, it just holds whatever pitch you last entered. If you want to hold an altitude, use that button, and whatever altitude you were at when you push that button, it will attempt to maintain. One quirk about that system, unlike most aircraft that use a barometric altimeter for their autopilots, this one actually used a radar altimeter, which is interesting because when you fly over an island or a landmass or anything really, it will pick that up and attempt to adjust for it. So if you notice the aircraft moving, pitching up or down when you fly over land, it's because it's trying to adjust its altitude based off of whatever it was at sea level or when you set it. As the manual suggests, I would recommend against using it as a terrain avoidance system. It doesn't adjust quickly enough to get you over that tall mountain or whatever the case may be, or that windmill, whatever the case may be. Some other systems we'll go over here. I'm going to move back to the co-pilot seat. You have here your air conditioning heating control. This aircraft, despite the name, did not have air conditioning. Air conditioning was just provided by opening the windows. So what it does do is it does heat the aircraft. As you know, at 5 degrees Celsius, it will start to get a little chilly, and you'll need to turn that on. If you don't, another quirk, while the left engine provides AC power, the right engine provides fuel to the burner that burns fuel to heat the de-icing boots and some also to the heater inside the aircraft. If you don't have the right engine fuel pump on, the heater and the de-icing system will not work. It also draws fuel from the right tank. So if you, after a long time of flying around the Arctic, you might notice that some of the fuel on your right tank is drained off a little quicker than it has on the left, and that's just because you are using that fuel for de-icing. At 0 degrees Celsius, which is indicated here, you're going to want to have the de-icing control on, and that'll be indicated here. That keeps your carburetors warm, it keeps the leading edge, tail surfaces warm. It does a lot of de-icing features for the aircraft. If you don't have it on, the first indication that you notice that you're having an icing problem is that your manifold pressure, which is indicated here, is going to start dropping off, followed closely behind by your RPM. This is because your carburetor is beginning to ice. Eventually, if you let it go long enough, you'll lose all power and the aircraft will fall out of the sky. So you're going to want to turn that de-icing boot on as quickly as possible in order to keep the aircraft from falling out of the sky. Another note, if you are traveling in Arctic conditions and you don't have the air conditioning heater control on, the torpedo bay receives its heating from the climate control system in the aircraft. This does things like thaw, in real life it would thaw out the parachute and keep the electronics in the torpedo warm. So if you don't have the heat control on and you open the torpedo bay to drop the torpedo, it's going to fall like a rock and just nosedive into the ocean, and it will be completely non-functional. If you attempt to drop a sonar buoy, they just won't release. The mechanisms for it will be frozen and they just won't work. So in order to use either the torpedo or the sonar buoys, you're going to need to have the heating control on for if you're in the Arctic. So keep that in mind when you are out there in the cold. Alright, so I believe I've covered most of the systems in regard to flight. We'll now turn around and head back to the Creative Island and prepare for a landing, and I will get back with you when we're close. Alright, we're returning now to the Creative Island, and a couple things I should have probably gone over before we took off. some emergency procedures and restrictions to the engines. As for the restriction of the engines, if you have them at full power for anything over 2 minutes, they will begin to overheat very quickly, regardless of having the cowl flaps open or the fuel pumps on. In the event of a water landing, over the pilot, co-pilot, and the 2 crewmen in the back, there are escape hatches that can be used to get out of the aircraft quickly, as it will sink. If you need to bail out, under the pilot and co-pilot seats, there are parachutes. And in the center aisle between the 2 crewmen in the back, there are also 2 parachutes for each of them in the event you need to bail out. Alright, so we're getting close to the creative island now. I'm going to open the cowl flaps, verify that our fuel pumps are remaining on, ensure that we have the rudder assist also on, and I'm going to turn off the autopilot. I'm going to extend our arrestor hook to simulate a carrier landing and line ourselves up with the runway a little bit here. Alright, I'm going to put out the landing here just a little bit early so I can show you or demonstrate something for you. If you look at the left wing, or on the right side of the screen, you'll see what is called the approach light. This indicates our angle of attack. If our angle of attack is positive, it'll be green. If it's level, it will be yellow. And if it's a negative angle attack, it will be red. This is for the LSO, or landing safety officer on the carrier, so he knows that our landing gear are down and our arrestor hook is extended, and what of course our angle of attack is, so he can help guide us in. So I'm going to line this up a little bit with the runway, and I'm going to start at a steep descent here because we're a little high. I'm going to lower our manifold pressure down to about 48 inches. There it is, 48 inches. And remember, we stall at 110 knots indicated. We want to stay above that. So we're going to start a steep descent here. A little steep than we probably would want to, but this should be okay. When we reach the deck, the mag-all on the back of the arrestor hook is going to grab the deck. And we're going to lower our throttle down to idle as quickly as possible, and I'm going to press 3 to engage the toe brake so we can come to a grinding halt as quickly as possible. So we stop within the confines of this very short runway here. Alright, so I'm going to decrease our descent here a little bit. Keep ourselves nice and centered on the deck. Bring her in nice and easy. As soon as we hit the deck, again, I'm going to reduce our throttle to 0. Nice descent, flare a little bit, cut the throttle, there it is, and toe brake. Alright. Perfect, alright. Holding the toe brake, I'm going to release the arrestor hook. I'm going to retract our flaps, and then we can begin folding the wings. And we're going to get out of the way because there's probably another airplane right behind us. And that is how you perform a carrier landing with the tracker. The next portion, we'll talk about anti-submarine warfare. Alright, in the second portion of this tutorial, we'll be discussing anti-submarine operations and the tools you have available to you to hunt and destroy submarines. Keep in mind, and this is at the U.S. Navy's own admittance, that ASW operations require quite a bit of patience and work to hunt, not just find, but destroy a submarine. It can be a very long, tedious process. So keep that in mind when you're out there hunting. It very often bears little fruit, and will require often many sorties on your part to hunt down and get a submarine, find one. The systems do work in multiplayer. I have tested them. However, there are a few quirks, mainly with buttons being unpressable and things of that nature. As for the systems, they seem to function fine when I was testing them. So with that said, I will now spawn in a submarine for us to hunt, and we'll get about the task of finding it. Alright, we have our submerged submarine spawned in, and first thing we need to go over is getting all of our sensory systems up and running. We also want to make sure that we're pretty close to the deck. At 150 feet, that's a good altitude to be at. So all our systems, particularly our MAD detectors, work accurately. So we're perfect here at 153 feet. I'm going to turn on our radar. To do that, I first need to lower the radome. It cannot be lowered with the gear down. It can be raised with the gear down, but it cannot be lowered, and that goes for the MAD boom as well. That's a safety feature that was built into the real aircraft, so keep that in mind. Same thing as the other systems. If the light's blinking, it's operating, and when it's solid, it's down. In the case of the radome. Alright, we're going to turn on our radar scope. It'll take us a few seconds for the CRT to warm up. With that said, while we're waiting, this CRT in the center of our display here is a repeater of the one that we were just sitting at. It displays exactly what we see here, just on a much smaller scope. Alright, we now have our sweep going around. We can turn on our console lights so we can see a little bit better. There's also a utility light over your head, same for the MAD boom operator. And we can increase or decrease the gain of the reticle here. And all our radar controls are located on this panel here. We have a high and low gain. What this does on high gain, it'll pick up anything in the water. People, crates, small boats, periscopes, anything. You can see we're picking up some stuff already. On a low gain, it'll pick up anything with a mass over, I believe it's 5, I have it set at. It's really only smaller boats and, of course, larger ones. So that's a good use of a filter right there if you're trying to avoid a lot of the clutter that's out there in the ocean. There's also a high rate and low rate sweep. As you can see, if I put it to high rate, it'll sweep a little faster. And there's also a sector scan, which will just scan from about 40 degrees to the right and 290 on the left in front of us. So that's the radar operation. We'll put it back to a 360 sweep, and we'll move over to the MAD operator. Turn on his console lights, and then in the center here we have the MAD boom, which is displayed on this little printer display here. We can turn on the power for the printer, which it's first going to do is feed the paper down the length of the printer and get it ready for us. While we're waiting for that, we can turn on the MAD boom. Again, the light will flicker, and we can see the MAD boom extending now. Once it's fully extended, you're going to see a straight line start being printed down this length of paper, and the paper will begin to scroll down. Once it starts to oscillate to the left and right, we know that the MAD boom is fully operational, and we can actually see the magnetic field it's picking up on this residual field gauge. It'll display, right now it's displaying 0.25. If you see it decrease rapidly, very quickly, it means you just passed over something that's not that's above the bottom of the ocean. And shortly thereafter, you see a spike on the screen here. And you can see the printer line coming down the length of the screen now. Alright, next we have our APA-69A. The Navy erroneously called this an electronic countermeasure. All it really is a radio direction finder. That's all it is. It wasn't a countermeasure device in any way, but that's what they called it. So first thing we want to do is we want to power up the system, and that's all controlled from this panel right here. In a moment you'll see the CRT for that warm up. We're going to turn on the antenna power for that system. And then what this system does is it'll scan between a frequency of 0 and a frequency of 10,800, and that's broken into several sectors that we can adjust. So if the subdriver that's out there is stupid enough to be transmitting consistently on one frequency, we will be able to find him and locate his position with this display here. So currently, if I get out of the seat, you can see there's a logic block below our feet here. Currently will scan between a 0 and 50 frequency range. I can set this switch and it'll automatically do it. So it'll begin scanning automatically between 0 and 50. Now I happen to know for a fact that our submarine that we have out there is transmitting continuously on 123 frequency. So we'll move that bracket to between 100 and 150. And then once it picks up somewhere between 123, there it goes, it's locked on, and it's displaying a little line off to the right here. So our target is behind us and to the right. And if we look at where our waypoint is, sure enough, it's behind us and to the right. So what we're going to do is, now that we have an idea of where our airplane is we're going to turn around and start aiming towards where that display is. So I'll get back with you once we're turned around. Okay, so we've gotten turned around and we're facing more or less towards the target. As you can see, our little line here has moved to the top of the screen, indicating that the target's more or less in front of us. The farther you are from the target, the harder time this triangulation system, or the direction finder, has of accurately pinpointing the target. As you get closer, you get a better accurate, or a more accurate reading. As of right now, we're going to be in terrain avoidance mode, as there are some islands in front of us. So once we get a little bit closer, I'll get back with you. Okay, so we're roughly 2.5 kilometers out. Things are going to start happening pretty quickly now. But what we need to do is we need to get ready to drop some sono buoys so we can find this guy. One last thing I'll note about these lines here: as you get closer to the target, they will become brighter. If you're farther away, of course, it'll be dimmer. Anyway, so we're going to move into the co-pilot seat here, and move our aircraft to the right here a little bit. I'm leaving the waypoint on so you can build confidence, or see that these systems work, and build confidence in them yourself. I'm going to arm our weapons. This will allow me to drop sono buoys and smoke if need be. And we're going to pretend we still don't know quite where this guy is. So using our radio direction finder, once we pass by it, this whole side of the screen should light up, and we'll know which side he's on. We'll know he's pretty close too. So there it is. It's starting to swing to the right. He's now 700 meters away. I don't think we're going to hit anything. It's getting wider. Our indication. Alright, and he's passing along our right side right about now. Okay, so I'm going to drop a smoke flare, and you're going to see that drop out now. And we'll use that to mark our position of where we got a good reading off our starboard side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the film, turn around, and get ready for another pass. So here we go. Alright, so I've turned around. Reset our throttle back to 88. And I'm going to line ourselves up with our smoke flare right there, because we know he was off to our right side when we went by him earlier. And I'm going to make sure our weapons are armed. I'm going to select the left sono buoy, because that's on the left side of the plane here in the engine nacelle. And when we get close to the smoke that I dropped, I'm going to drop the sono buoy. I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to push the button, and out it goes. It's going to open a chute. It's also going to drop its own smoke flare as well, to mark where its position is, and then it's going to sink to the bottom and begin activating and looking for any kind of lasers. Hopefully we find one. You don't want to get more than about 4 kilometers away from your sono buoys as you start to lose radio frequency or radio communication with them. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to go back here to our radar operator, and we're going to select his screen to sono, and you're going to see 2 cursors here. These arrows control the top or port sono buoy, and the bottom arrows control the bottom cursor for the starboard sono buoy, which we released. So we're going to turn on the starboard sono buoy, and we can move this cursor along with these arrows. Now what we're looking for is a spike on this static line here. We'll wait for that. We have to wait for the sonar buoy to descend to the bottom and assemble itself, or get itself moving. It's also going to be scanning frequencies, looking for the hopeful target. Hopefully we find it. We're also going to move back up here to the co-pilot and get him ready to go. The co-pilot, on a side note here, does not have control of the landing gear via the number 4 keys. You'll see it says Mark 6A plotting board. And if you press 4, it'll pop up this screen here. In real life, this was just a press board with a couple pieces of plastic on it with a spinner in the middle. and they could spin this around and plot certain points. You can do this as well. It's actually a moving map, although you can't see any terrain on it. If you press the screen with either the Q or E keys, it'll start marking the screen with blue dots. If you press and hold, it'll erase the marks. And just hold, there it goes, and it erased them. You can, it'll store up to as many as 5 marks. So I'm going to turn around, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, we're heading back towards our smoke that you can see over there, and our target. I'm going to move back to the radar operator again. It's nice to have 2 guys. Oh, and my apologies, I actually dropped the port sonar buoy. My bad. Alright, so you can actually see, that's good. We have a spike. And I'm going to move the cursor to the right here a little bit, and you can see this spike right here. That is, the sonar buoy is detecting something in the water that's emitting a laser. So we're going to move the port sonar buoy cursor over that. Get it nice and lined up, make it pretty. There you go. Alright, and we're going to read that gauge right there. It says port sonar buoy bearing to contact. So from the sonar buoy, it's detecting a target at 123.75 degrees from its location. Alright, so with that said, we're going to move up here, and we're going to keep an eye on this Mark 6A plotting board, because when we dropped that last sonar buoy, it marked it on the screen for us. And now that we moved the cursor on the sonar buoy display, it'll have moved a black line, a plotting line, on this plotting board for us. And once we get close to the buoy, it'll come into view. So this is good. Now we can decide where we want to drop our next buoy so we can triangulate the position of the submarine. Alright, you can see the black line coming onto the screen now. Because it was the port buoy, it's associated with a red dot. So I'm going to drop the starboard sonar buoy now, and we'll see if that finds anything. It's probably too far away, but we'll see. As you can see on the screen, it now put down a green dot indicating that's the starboard sonar buoy. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid hitting the cooling tower here and the windmill. Not a great place to be tracking a submarine. Once it hits the bottom, and it deploys and starts scanning, hopefully we pick up a target with that. If not, there's ways around that. So I'll turn back around and be back with you in a minute. Okay, we've turned back around, and as you can see, the sonar buoy on the top has actually picked up probably a little bit of the flare from our previous buoy. So we're going to move that around a little bit. It's getting a little flaky over there. That's probably because of the laser. Or not the laser, the flare that was dropped from the starboard buoy. I'm going to move the cursor for the bottom starboard sonar buoy over to its cursor. Mind you, the batteries on these sonar buoys only last about 5 minutes. After about 5 minutes, they lose a lot of their effectiveness. And you can see it's acting a little wonky right now. And that's okay. We'll let it do its thing. Our submarine is stationary, so we're not too worried about it. Now, as you can see, this black line from our starboard sonar buoy has gone straight now. So what that tells us is that actually these 2 lines where they intersect are about where our submarine is. So that's good. What we can use now is we can turn ourselves around and aim for where those 2 lines intersect, and using our MAD detector fly over the top of the submarine, hopefully, and identify it and then engage it as necessary. So I'm going to turn back around, and we'll try and aim for those 2 intersections where those 2 lines intersect. Okay, so we're back. So I actually had to fly over it once before because we actually lost contact with one of our sonar buoys momentarily. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try and fly towards those 2 plot lines. I'm going to avoid looking at the waypoint on the ground there, and I'm going to use our Mark 6 plotting board and try and line myself up with these plot lines. It's a little hard to do because they're so pixelated. But if I do it right and fly down the bearing of our sonar buoy here, hopefully And a little to the right, I think. Trying not to look at that waypoint. Alright. Now we're also a little high. 170 feet. That's a little high. We'll see what happens. So we're going to go back here. We're going to check out our MAD detector. See if we pick up anything on the printer. We should have by now. Okay. Not a problem. We'll just have to make another pass. One thing I should mention as I turn around here, even if the sonar buoys lose their power, these plot lines will remain on the screen for you to use. Fortunately, you only have the 2. The real aircraft actually had initially 16, so you just got to make do with 2. If one doesn't work, you can fly the plot line for 1 if the other failed. But they do work in any depth, so you should have that advantage. Alright, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and fly the starboard, the green dot. I'm going to try and fly up the center of that. Hopefully. Again, I'm trying to avoid looking at the marker. It's not easy. I'm going to put us a little lower this time. Still got the autopilot on. There we go. Right on the money. Let's see what happens. Hopefully. Alright, I'm going to go to the right a little bit. Nope, nope, left, 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 left. I'm too far off the line. Alright, I'm going to level out because we're getting close, and the MAD detector doesn't like being at weird angles. And we're going to go back and look at the screen, see if it's spiked. And nothing. Okay, so what that tells us is either there's nothing here, or we've just got to keep hunting. So we'll try it one more time. Alright, we're back. I've turned around. Trying to fly at that intersection again. Hopefully I'm not too far to the left. I think I am. Aircraft's still leveling out on my last turn. Yep, I think we're a little far to the right. Looks okay. Alright, we're going to move back to our MAD operator. See if he picks up a spike. There it is. There's our spike right there. So I'm going to drop a smoke flare right now. You can see it dropping out. You can also see, because we're so high, how far off it is from the actual target. But that's okay. Now we know that somebody's there. We've got him on the radar direction finder, we found him on the MAD, and we found him with our sonar. Now we have 2 choices at this point. If it was the Cold War, we'd just fly around and harass him until he ran out, his batteries ran down and he had to surface, at which point we could declare victory. In this case, however, since he's submerged, we're going to fire a torpedo at him. Now, Mr. Neutron, one of our wonderful community contributors, has given us a laser-guided torpedo. This aircraft carries 1, and we also have 6 rockets, unguided rockets that can be fired, mostly for surface targets. So I'm going to turn around and we'll get ready to fire that torpedo because he's submerged. Okay, we're back. I'm turning around now. I'm looking for my smoke that I dropped earlier. See if we can find it. Trying to avoid all the windmills around here. I don't see my smoke. That's unfortunate. Alright, so while we're flying in here, first thing I want to do is demonstrate the rockets. With the weapons armed, you can either fire singles or salvos. Salvo is a pair of 2. And all you have to do is press the number 2. And it will fire the rockets. They're not great, but they do the job. To ready the torpedo, what we need to do is open the torpedo bay. Once it is fully opened, the torpedo will be ready to fire, and the rockets will be shut off. Once this light is solid, the torpedo bay is open fully, and we can deploy our torpedo, which we're going to do now. I don't want it homing in on the windmill. So the torpedo is out. There it goes. And with any luck, it'll begin homing in on our submarine. There we go. We'll close the torpedo bay door. And at this point, we don't really need any more weapon systems. So I'm going to unarm the system. Now, we may have dropped that torpedo in a little bit too shallow water. In fact, you can see the submarine there. Foxtrot. So we're not going to wait around and see if it actually killed it or not. We're just going to head home. Because we're actually, we burned up quite a bit of fuel doing that. We burned up 2/3 of a tank flying all the way over here and hunting that submarine. So it's time to go home. Alrighty folks, that concludes our Grumman Tracker tutorial. I apologize, it was a little long, but hopefully you came to appreciate how hard ASW operations were in the 1950s and are currently in the game. I would recommend that if you're looking for something that has a little bit more staying power, a little faster, and a little bit more modern, that you check out Ghost and Literal's Viking S3. It's a very capable plane, very detailed, and if you're looking for a step up from this old girl, I highly recommend you check out their S3 Viking. So take care and have a nice day. Okay, so as an appendix to our tutorial here, I forgot to talk about our communications equipment. We have a penguin nose transponder aboard this aircraft, which is modified slightly for military purposes, as well as 2 radios that you can both transmit and receive on. If you would like, with this switch here, you can receive on both radios. It does not matter which one you're transmitting on, but you can listen to both, whichever frequencies you have that tuned to. And if you have it off, it'll only receive on whichever radio you're transmitting on, which can be selected from this switch here. Either on or off will select either the HF or UHF radio that you're going to transmit on, and you can cycle preset frequencies with this button here. So you can select channel 7 for the UHF radio, and then channel 8 for the HF radio. And those I'll show you how to program in a second. The IFF master transmit, this is the transponder, penguin nose transponder. If you turn it on, you're going to be transmitting mode 1. Mode 1 is a 2-digit code. If you're using penguin nose ATC controllers, all you're going to see is a 2-digit code displayed on that screen. You won't receive any altimeter data or aircraft type, and that 2-digit number can be changed within the aircraft. It's usually for naval purposes, for identifying flights, so maybe flight 12, flight 23, whatever the case is. So that's what that purpose of mode 1. So having that switch on will transmit on mode 1. If you come back here to our MAD controller, he has control of mode 2 and mode 3. So mode 2, if you turn that on, will transmit the mode 2 code. Mode 2 is a pre-programmed 4-digit code that cannot be changed, built into the aircraft. It's usually the tail number or the build number, or usually the same thing. All 4 of these aircraft have different codes for this, and if you're using, again, penguin nose display, you're going to see the type of aircraft, which nation it belongs to, and then a 4-digit code, and that's what mode 2 does. And then mode 3 works just like mode 3 or mode Charlie that you'd see in civilian aircraft. This will send the it'll transmit the aircraft type, the aircraft altitude, and then a non-discrete 4-digit code that we can program as well. To program these, we need to move to the back of the aircraft. We'll move back into our electronics compartment back here. And here's the transponder, and then our 2 radios. We'll go over the transponder first. On mode 1, you can pre-program the code. Here is a 2-digit, the 2-digit code will be transmitting on mode 1. which is 25, and that's all that air traffic controller is going to see is 25. If you switch to mode 3, you can transmit a non-discrete code. A lot of militaries use a 5000 number, so in this case we can transmit 5200, and that'll be our non-discrete air traffic controller mode 3 code. And you can switch between either one to program it. This radio is our HF radio. You can see here the presets, and you can change these in the editor. You don't have to do it this way, but you can see them displayed here, which ones you have programmed. We can change the code by entering one here. So enter a code between 0 and 99. So I'll enter 67, let's say. And then I'm going to select down, let's say I want to preset channel 4. I'm going to press that button and store it, and you can see preset 4 is now frequency 67. And I can do the same thing for this, the UHF radio, however the range is between 100 and 10,000. So I can do the same thing, 67, 87, let's say. Preset 7, press the store, and it's preset channel 7 is 6787. So you might want to write these down on a piece of paper if you're presetting a lot of frequencies. And that's how the radios work. Have a nice day.